Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a grim, dark fable, one that unpacks some of the heaviest Nietzschean philosophy imaginable. We're going to be stepping into a profoundly haunting narrative that uses rich philology and symbolism to ask some really tough questions about freedom, destiny, and the terrifying weight of true independence. This isn't just a fantasy story. It's basically a mirror reflecting our own deepest anxieties about who we become when the structures that define us suddenly just vanish. So settle in, because we're about to untangle a brilliantly dark web of ideas. We open with our narrator, who is this incredibly haunting figure. They tell us, "Look at these hands. They hold no keys, yet they remain curled around the memory of iron." It's a perfect illustration of the lingering grip of subjugation, even long after the cage is gone. Physically, they're free. There are no actual chains, no warden, no locked doors anywhere, yet their very posture tells a completely different story. It shows us that true imprisonment often outlasts the physical cage. The mind and the soul can remain perfectly molded to the exact shape of an oppressor that no longer even exists. And to really get to the bottom of this, we need to look at some word origins. Take the word aghast. Its Old English root reveals that to be aghast is to be a phantom, aghast, haunting the ruins of a history that has already ended. Our narrator explicitly claims this title. They aren't a living, breathing participant in the present. They are a spectral echo. When the old world of oppression ended, it left behind this massive, terrifying vacuum. But instead of feeling liberated by this new empty space, the narrator is aghast. They're paralyzed by it. They're just a ghost wandering the corridors of a timeline that has officially concluded. Now, this state of being gives rise to a deep, festering condition that Nietzsche calls ressentiment. The narrator lovingly polishes the remnants of their former subjugation. It's a tragic state where you can literally only define every fiber of your being through the lens of whoever used to own you. The narrator becomes a doppelganger, just mimicking a man who is gone. By tending to the memories of their slavery, they avoid the incredibly hard work of building a new identity from scratch. Their soul isn't a temple of their own design. It's a haunted house, echoing with the footsteps of a dead master. Because ultimately, they completely refuse what's called the grausame Entbindung, or the horrific untying. Think of it like untying a boat from a dock. Sure, the boat is free, but now it's at the absolute mercy of the ocean currents. That's the essence of this horrific untying. To step out of the shadows of the past means stepping into a vast, indifferent unknown. The narrator makes a calculated yet incredibly tragic choice here. The comfort of a known cage is mathematically preferable to the sheer terror of a void where you are completely and utterly on your own. Let's move to our first story, the parable of the broken instrument, or the origin of the void. In this parable, we meet a master weaver who spends his entire life crafting a magnificent tapestry for a celestial king. Imagine pouring your whole soul, your intellect, and your absolute devotion into a singular purpose. The weaver believes his threads are part of a divine design, but when the final thread is cut and he presents his work, he looks up and realizes the throne room is empty. The king is a myth. The purpose that animated his entire existence was an illusion. Now you have archetypes like the Starfinder, the cosmic navigator who boldly charts a course through the void of a post-theological universe. But the weaver is utterly shattered by this emptiness. This moment represents the naked death of God, leaving the weaver as an exposed, broken instrument with no hand to play it. He is struck by Weltschmerz, a profound world pain. His reality completely fractures. All that teleology collapses. He had achieved true intellectual and artistic mastery, but that mastery only served to give him a clearer view of the existential void. In a world without a celestial king, the soul is left raw and unbuffered. He is a perfectly tuned instrument, but without a divine musician, he's effectively broken. Now let's explore a radically different response in the parable of the frozen seed, shattering the anvil. So picture a freezing wasteland of ice. Here, a hero named Siegfried finds an ancient anvil, the literal mold and tool of the old dead gods. Faced with this last remnant of divine authority, he has a choice: kneel to the memory of that authority or destroy it. Siegfried chooses to shatter the anvil. This is the ultimate act of radical self-definition. He's boldly declaring that he will not be shaped by the tools or the rules of the past. He's going to forge his own way, even in the middle of a desolate wasteland. Through this destruction, he's channeling the Nietzschean will to power. Siegfried doesn't look at the freezing wasteland in despair. Actually, he uses the lethal frost not as a tomb, but as a harsh grindstone to sharpen his own power. He aggressively authors his own destiny, independent of the gods, becoming the frozen seed that forcefully commands itself to bloom right in the dead of winter. It's an absolutely staggering display of active self-authoring. Siegfried is practicing amor fati. He loves his fate, even if that fate is to eventually freeze to death in the wasteland. But we have to remember, we're hearing this story through our narrator, the spectral phantom. And the narrator looks at Siegfried and just mocks him. To the phantom, Siegfried is a fool building his own icy tomb, a blue sepulchre. The narrator's argument is that without the master's anvil to strike against, Siegfried's hammer has no meaning. He forgets that without the oppressor, the rebel is just swinging at empty air. This brings us to our third story, the parable of the voluntary herd, and the creation of the Emerald Dungeon. In this one, a mass of travelers is wandering in the dark when they suddenly discover a verdant spark, this pure source of vibrant life force and potential. But pure potential demands radical autonomy, which absolutely terrifies them. So, in the parable of the golden vine, they take this spark, cultivate it into a literal golden vine, but rather than letting it grow wild and free, they weave its radiant branches together to construct the Emerald Dungeon. They take the very magic of liberation and use it to build a shiny collective cage. By doing this, these travelers become what Nietzsche called the last men. They eagerly trade the heavy burden of an individual soul for the cozy comfort of the herd. They actively seek out a predictable master. They literally beg to be bound. Their defining tragedy is simple but profound. They fear the dark of the unknown vastly more than they actually love their own freedom. And looking at this Gemeinschaft, this community built entirely on shared weakness and subjugation, our narrator finds kinship. They relate to the herd's desire to act like a petrified ascetic. This is someone who chooses voluntary petrification, basically turning themselves to stone rather than dealing with the messy, unpredictable, and fluid demands of truly living. This collective cage provides the spirit of gravity. It pulls everything down, making reality rigid, predictable, and, above all, safe. It completely insulates the herd from the dizzying horror of having to make their own choices. They're essentially opting for a living death. They're alive, sure, but predictable and insulated forever from the terrifying vacuum of the void. Let's move to our conclusion, embracing the living death, or the final haunting. Ultimately, this explainer boils down to a stark choice: braving the unbuffered existence of the frost, or curling around the memory of iron in a collective cage. The fable lays out these two completely incompatible paths. On one side, you have the active, self-authoring ascetic, like Siegfried smashing the anvil and blooming in the ice, even if it means dying completely alone. On the other side, you have the spectral captive phantom in the Emerald Dungeon, sacrificing all individuality just to share the artificial warmth of a voluntary cage. So, to pull it all together, we're left with three archetypal responses to an empty celestial throne room. The Weaver illustrates the crushing Weltschmerz of losing the overarching narrative. Siegfried shows the heroic yet tragic attempt to become your own master through the will to power. And the Last Men show us the societal default, succumbing to the spirit of gravity and the safety of the Gemeinschaft to avoid the heavy burden of freedom. And our narrator leaves us with this chilling admission, fully embracing their status as a doppelganger mimicking a vanished man. We are all phantoms here, haunting the ruins of what we once were, but at least in the Emerald Dungeon, we are not alone in our haunting. They know they are a phantom. They know the Emerald Dungeon is a trap. But the absolute terror of the empty throne room is so great that they choose the dungeon anyway. They choose the memory of iron simply because it means they get to be close to other phantoms. They trade everything just so they don't have to be alone in the dark. So I want to leave you with this provocative question to chew on. When faced with the terrifying void of freedom, which living death would you ultimately choose? Would you have the strength to shatter the anvil and face the freezing wasteland on your own terms? Or when the cold really sets in, would you find yourself reaching for the familiar, heavy chains of the Emerald Dungeon, just to feel the warmth of the herd next to you? It's a heavy thought for sure, but that's exactly why these parables matter. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.